All right, guys, so let's talk about how to kick your cravings to the curb. I know a lot of people, this is a very popular one. You will deal with cravings, and some people deal with the urge to binge. Same thing. Why? Because it's a brain issue, right? Cravings are coming from your brain. Cravings are nothing more than a neurological suggestion. We call them neurological junk because it's your lower brain making a suggestion of what you should do based on what you've always done. Right? So cravings are the way the brain expresses what you've programmed into it. And think about this. If you've habitually eaten high sugar, processed foods for years, for decades, you've eaten these high sugar processed foods. What simple sugar does is it activates the area of the brain that regulates craving, reward, and addiction, right? So you've been doing this for years. You've been activating the pleasure center of the brain. Now that's the same area of the brain that is activated by drugs, sex, and alcohol. Food does the same thing. Your brain is a pleasure junkie. And when you activate the pleasure centers of the brain, it is very difficult to break those habits. Right? They're very difficult to break. And you're not going to get there by simply cutting back on the things that you like to eat. It doesn't work that way. Sugar is sugar. So when you get cravings for something, people often ask me, what can I use to satisfy my craving? Well, you don't use anything to satisfy your craving because craving is just your brain's way of making a suggestion that this is what you should eat. Why? Because it's what you've always done. And over the years, what you've always done creates a neurological pathway in the brain. It's like a wired circuit. Well, your brain isn't physically wired, but it develops circuits. It develops circuits based on your habitual patterns. So your cravings have a neurological pathway in the brain, and your brain develops these neurological pathways. So, hey, it's just simple. It likes easy. It likes easy. Imagine if you had to relearn how to ride a bike every time you pick up a bike. But instead, you see a bike and your brain goes into, hey, ride bike program. You see your toothbrush, your brain goes into brush your teeth program. So I call these brush your teeth habits. I have a series of habits I call brush your teeth habits, how to develop brush your teeth habits. Those are things that becomes very instinctual. You don't have to think about them. They become second nature. And that's what you want your good habits to be. They need to become brush your teeth habits. So cravings are nothing more than your brain's suggestion of what you should do when it's triggered. And it can be triggered based on how you're feeling, based on the time of day, based on what you're thinking. It could be triggered based on what you see. You pass a fast food restaurant, it could lead to a trigger. You feel like you need some, you need some Mickey D's, you need some of those French fries, or those. You need a burger, or you need a milkshake. Whatever you have habitually done, you're triggering the brain, right? So the only way to deal with cravings over the long term is to rewire your brain, is to rewire those neurological circuits, to change them so that when your brain is triggered, it goes into a different pattern. You need to reprogram the pattern, right? So the first way you deal with cravings, folks, is never feed a craving. Because when you feed a craving, you're reinforcing the neurological the neurological pathway. You're just reinforcing that. It's becoming stronger. So anytime you feed a craving, you say, "Oh, I feel like chocolate," and I'll just have a little piece of chocolate, and my craving is satisfied. Of course, your craving is satisfied because you just fed your body the reward that your brain is looking for, sugar. So now you've just reinforced that craving. So that is not a way to deal with craving. The way to deal with craving is to interrupt the process, interrupt the pattern, right? Use a thought interrupt. You interrupt the process. You see, a habit loop has several parts to it. It has the trigger, the routine, and the reward. The whole process is leading to a reward. Your brain is looking for a reward. right? If there was no reward, you wouldn't have cravings. If there was no reward, your brain wouldn't develop a habit around something. Your brain develops a habit around something that you tell it is important because you do it over and over again. So the good news is whatever you do repeatedly, day after day, your brain will develop a habit around. So it becomes very easy. Good habits or bad habits. That's the bad news. It will do things, it will do the same to habits that, well, I don't call them bad habits, I call them habits that no longer serve you, because at one point they did serve you. That's why your brain developed a neurological pathway for that habit, because it served you, because you did it repeatedly enough for your brain to develop a pathway around it. Right? It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen one or two times. You've done it repeatedly over and over. And imagine practicing these habits for decades, and you expect to solve them just like that. It's not going to happen. It's going to take time. But the first rule is never feed a craving, because you're just reinforcing that neurological pathway. So if hunger is not the problem, folks, then food is not the solution. If you're not physically hungry, then feeding your body food, then you're just reinforcing that emotional hunger pathway. And ask yourself, does that serve you? No, that doesn't serve you. So what you want to do instead, you want to interrupt that process, right? When you get a craving, just by interrupting the process, putting some distance between the thought and the action, the urge and the action. Put some distance between the urge and the action. You start practicing just for a minute, just interrupting the process. Instead of automatically reaching for something, you interrupt the process, put some distance between the urge and the action. Drink a glass of water. Maybe you're just dehydrated. But you drink a glass of water and you wait 5-10 minutes without acting. And I guess a lot of times, folks, you'll find that urge just disappears because, again, they're just neurological junk. There's just a neurological pathway. They're just suggestions from your lower brain. This is what you've always done when you feel this way, when you see this, these are just suggestions from your lower brain, the impulsive part of your brain. And by using thought interrupt, you give your higher brain, the part of the brain that is responsible for long-term big decisions that serve you. You give your higher brain a chance to catch up so you can make those big decisions. And then you will see, well, do I really want this? No, this doesn't really serve me. Not what I really want, right? So put some distance between the urge and the action and never feed a craving. And one of the ways that you can deal with cravings over the long term is what we're practicing here. Learn to balance your meals. Every time you eat, learn to eat balanced meals. So you always balance your carbohydrates with protein and fat. So that sugar is released into your bloodstream very slowly. So it doesn't activate the pleasure center of the brain. You eat sugar, boom. Simple sugars, boom, automatically activates the pleasure center of the brain, because remember, simple sugar is the same as drugs, sex, and alcohol to your brain. And your brain loves pleasure. Your brain is a pleasure junkie. Your brain loves pleasure. So the more sugar you eat, the more pleasure your brain gets. Guess what? You get that high. And it's very difficult to break that high. So if you want to learn to deal with your cravings over the long term, then you stop feeding your cravings. You learn the process of putting some distance between the urge and the action. Drink a glass of water, wait 5-10 minutes. It won't be easy. Yes, it's not going to happen overnight. Just because you have a come to Jesus moment doesn't mean that you're saved, right? You got to keep practicing it, and you're going to fail. That's okay. That's part of the process. But the more you practice this, the better you will become at it. So you have to understand that the body is controlled by a very sophisticated communications loop between various systems of the body and your brain. And these loops, these neurological pathways, that's what they're called, these are initiated by various hormones. And these hormones are triggered by what you eat. So I want you to think about that. What you eat is what triggers the hormonal response, and that is what leads to what activates whatever neurological pathway is activated in the brain. that brain-body communication. What you eat triggers hormones, and hormones trigger the particular brain-body communication. We call those neurological pathways. So the best way to kick those cravings to the curb over the long term is to learn to interrupt the process by putting some distance between the urge and the action. That gives your higher brain a chance to catch up. A lot of times, those urges will just disappear. Sometimes they won't because they're strong. They've been there for decades. So sometimes, hey, you are going to fail. You are going to eat some sweets. You are going to eat some sugar. The best thing to do is, instead of eating sugar, is to eat something else. Eat an apple. Eat a banana with some nuts. Eat something balanced, right? Because if hunger is the problem, then anything will satisfy that hunger. And if it doesn't satisfy that hunger, the next question to ask yourself, well, what do I really hunger for? What do I really hunger for, right? If you eat something and that hunger isn't satisfied, then it's emotional hunger. And food won't satisfy emotional hunger. So now you get to ask yourself, what do I hunger for? What am I feeling here? What am I thinking? Remember, thoughts control emotions, and emotions control actions. So you become a detective. We talked about becoming a student. This isn't easy. There's no hacks for this, right? This isn't about having a hack that's going to help you to deal with this immediately. No, this is about becoming a student, becoming a detective, learning to figure out what's the missing piece, and learning to practice the habits that over the long term will rewire your brain and help you kick those cravings to the curb, okay?